My next guests are a vet and her husband. Steve Ankers has written a book called It's a Dog's Life for the Other Half. He and Margaret are with me in the studio. Good morning to you both.
Morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so in your relationship, how pivotal has your work been, Margaret, in impinging on your married life, your relationship and all of that? Does it really kind of overtake the relationship, Steve?
Well, I think Margaret would say probably not at all, and I'll tell you the truth, and that's it is quite a factor. Yes, I think when you realise that your social life is going to consist of sort of late arrivals and cancellations and being covered in mud, or your conversation at the dinner table turns out to be about exsanguination and other gory things.
I beg your pardon, I don't even know what that is. What is that? It's just for the record.
Blood, loss of blood.
Oh, okay, right. We're on the same page now. And so, did you know what you were letting yourself in for? Margaret, were you a vet when you met, the pair of you?
Well, I joined Steve's brother in his huge practice in Northumberland from Shetland, where I had been a vet for a short time. And we met at a Christmas do at his brother's, and he had been brought up with John, his elder brother, and he knew what he was taking on because he had been living the vet's life more or less intermittently for quite a long time before he met me at the practice.
I should have known better.
But you didn't. You didn't follow your own advice. Why not? What was it about this woman?
Oh, well, I'm sure if we've got time enough on the programme, I could extol the loving virtues of my wife here.
How long have you been together, you two, then?
Oh, this is our 30th this year, isn't it? Oh, in terms of, yes, wedding anniversary would be our 30th.
But together longer than that?
We're getting the hang of it.
Okay, and tell us about, like, you live in Sussex now, but where have you lived before being here?
Well, my first job was in Shetland, and I moved down to work at Steve's brother's practice in Northumberland, and that was in 82.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve worked in Manchester at the time, and when we decided to get married, I moved down to Manchester. We were there for a long time, moved to Sussex 22 years ago.
And tell us about the practice that you run these days.
I work for a lovely small animal practice in Hove. It's called Acorn Vets, and it's a lovely family practice.
Is that like Acorn Antiques for pets?
Yes, it is, yes.
Is it really?
Yes, a very common name for a veterinary practice, actually, but it's based in Hove in Portland Road, and I more or less run the surgery at Hangleton, and that I've worked there for 8 years, and but I've been in Sussex working as a locum for 21 years. From Manchester, which is very different. I can
imagine. So how do people's pets differ then between a great metropolis like Manchester and leafy Hove?
Well, the diseases differ. You know, a huge, great big conurbation like Manchester has more sort of, nasty diseases, but living in the soft, rich south, animals tend to be more looked after, they're vaccinated more, they're people spend, should I say, more money on their pets down south. It's actually a much...
We're not perfect though, are we, down here for looking after our pets, I'm sure.
The change is probably more marked, isn't it, if you go back to your days in Northumberland and Shetland, mm-hmm. where a fair bit of the business was to do with
large
farm animals.
Yes.
And obviously there's been a change in time anyway, and that's become less of a part of the clientele even for mixed practices, but the work that Margaret's done in Manchester and Sussex has been small animals, we'd call it pets.
Okay.
It was a huge change. Working in Shetland and Northumberland, which were in a huge mixed general practice, moving to marry my husband in Manchester, there weren't that many farms about, so I was sort of channeled into small animal practice, which is a huge difference, and from there on that was it. It was small animal all the way, which I think is more interesting. But
so your job really is not a 9-to-5 job, I would imagine, most times, is it?
No.
And so tell me how that affects your life, Steve.
Well, yeah. So obviously, a lot of vets do emergency call-out duties at weekends and in the evenings, and I was familiar with that system growing up with my older brother. And in those days, you couldn't really even leave the house if you were on call. The best you could do would be to put a loud bell on your phone and go out in the garden. Then things obviously moved along with pagers. You could go off to the restaurants or the theatre. And of course, if your pager went, it could be a bit embarrassing in the middle of a play. Nowadays, it tends to be cell phones and life's got a little bit easier. But we, ever since we were married and then had the baby, I often used to go down in the middle of the night as well, with Margaret setting off in the middle of the night for a clinic in Old Trafford, in a fairly rough part of town in Manchester. And we would shove the baby in the carry cot and off we'd go. And I think a lot of people assumed I was the vet in those days, being the chap. And of course, they soon realised that I didn't know very much, but I was a kind of unpaid.
Yeah, how much did you get away with before they sussed that out?
Well, I like to think I still perform useful roles as a shoulder to lean on and an expert advisor on what the newly deceased dog should take with her into the afterlife, that kind of thing.
That's a handy role
An
to play.
unpaid veterinary nurse, unpaid anaesthetist, under my supervision, of course.
Very undervalued, I think.
You don't really feel like that, do you?
He's still holding down his normal job during the day.
Which was what?
I've always worked in the environmental field. I suppose a town planner officially, but mainly in and around Manchester. It was carrying out environmental improvement schemes in Sussex. Well, and also did that for East Sussex County Council. But now I'm partially retired. I work for the South Downs Society, which is the Friends group for the National Park. So I suppose I'm an environmental campaigner, not necessarily the kind that chains himself to a tree or...
Under what circumstance would you?
Chain myself to a tree?
Yes. How angry would you have to... What would they have to try and do to the South Downs National Park? Frack on it, for instance?
Well, we've been active in our lobbying and campaigning on fracking, but we tend, as a society, to write stiffly worded letters, and there's a role for different kinds of campaigning. I think we complement one another.
Okay. And so how did you come to write a book about your life and Margaret's life working in and around the vet's practice? What was the kind of germ of that idea?
It was odd, really. I had co-written a couple of satires on town planning and the environment years ago, but never tried anything on my own. And I started a writing course, a distance writing course, and we had to come up with an idea for a non-fiction book. And in fact, it was Margaret's idea. She said, well, if you think of all the strange stories, all the funny stories we've had over the years, that might work. And I thought about that. And if you add in all the experiences with my brother, whose career, I think he's referred to in the local press up there as Northumberland's longest serving vet. He's older than I am, and he's quite a national expert on things like exotics. And apart from the TV work and other things he's done, he has his own hobby farm with wallabies and llamas and camels. And I think if you start to add that into all the stories that we've had with Margaret, you end up with a decent book.
Well, give us a couple of tales from the book then, the kind of scrapes the pair of you got into. Don't fight amongst yourselves. just dive in with a story. Steve, off you go.
I think one of the most interesting ones really was the story of the cat that a local family moved from here in Sussex up to Scotland, and a little while later their next door neighbours found this emaciated, bedraggled animal in the back garden, and they thought, if that was twice the weight, that could have almost have been, the cat that used to live next door. And they brought it into the surgery, and it looked like a goner. I think Margaret would admit.
My advice was put this poor animal to sleep, and they had rung their ex-neighbours and said, "Has your cat gone missing?" Yes, 3 or 4 months ago. This was in Scotland as opposed to Hurstpere Point in East Sussex, and I advised the people to put the cat to sleep because it just looked like a dead cat, and the owners, the ex-owners, were so please persuade the vet to treat this animal. So we started off with fluids. It was days and nutrition, given by tube, and it was days before this cat actually even lifted its head. And on the third or fourth day, there was a tiny little, sort of movement of the head, and it stood up. and then began to eat. So after 2 or 3 weeks, the cat was absolutely fine. You know, the owners had flown down, took it back up to Scotland, and about 2 months afterwards, we received this big A4 envelope at the practice. Opened it up, it was a huge photograph of this unrecognisable cat, weight back on, fur, fantastic, you know.
Are you telling me that this cat made its way to Hurstpere Point back from Scotland on its own?
Yeah, from Scotland back to its own home, its ex-home in Hurstpere Point.
That is extraordinary in anybody's book.
Yeah.
It's negotiating its own book, I think.
Well, quite rightly too. What a story to tell.
It's not that uncommon, and cats are very bonded.
No, come on,
to
that is uncommon, Margaret. Don't tell me that cats all the time are walking the length of the country.
That is an extreme case, but I mean, it's very common for cats to when owners move home, for them to try to get back to their own.
You're a vet. Explain to me how that works.
I can't see it catching on
ley
like
lines.
homing pigeons, you know, where people take their cats to Scotland and see how long it takes.
Yeah, I mean, the cat was, I mean, you can only imagine what that cat had gone through.
Avoiding every road, motorway, train line that it's had to intersect, finding some food along the way, maybe, or maybe not.
It lost about 2/3 of its
perhaps
body
it just
weight.
went on its march on its stomach.
I mean, it looked like a dead animal when I looked at it. So these sort of stories we have in the books, and that was one of the most bizarre ones.
I don't know how you're going to top that, so I'll leave people to read more about it in your book. Thank you so much for coming in today. It's nice to meet you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's A Dog's Eye for the Other Half is the name of the book. Tales from In and Around a Veterinary Practice by Steve Ankers is out now. BBC Sussex and BBC Surrey at 9 minutes to midday.
Loving where we live. This is BBC Sussex.